Faith had buried her husband on a Saturday. By Monday morning, his family was standing in her living room, telling her the children would be better off with them. She looked at her daughters, Victoria, 8 years old, clutching a school bag, and Roselyn, barely 5, hiding behind her sister's legs. And something ancient and unbreakable rose up inside her. They could take the house, they could take the car, but her children. That was where mercy ended and war began. Faith and Vincent had built something rare, a marriage where laughter came easier than arguments, where decisions were made together over Sunday afternoon rice and stew, where their 2 daughters grew up watching their parents hold hands across the dinner table. They were not wealthy, but Vincent worked hard as a mid-level bank manager in Lagos, and Faith ran a small provision shop 2 streets away from their rented flat in Surulere. It was enough. More than enough. Vincent had been complaining of headaches for weeks, brushing them off as work stress. "I am fine," he would say, kissing her forehead before leaving for the office. "Stop worrying so much." But the morning he collapsed in the bathroom, Faith knew her world had just cracked open. The doctors called it a brain aneurysm. 3 days later, Vincent was gone. He was only 37 years old. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and crying relatives. Betty, Vincent's mother, wailed the loudest, throwing herself on the casket, cursing death and destiny. George, Vincent's older brother, stood beside her, stone-faced and silent, his eyes already calculating something Faith could not yet see. She was too numb to notice, too broken to read the warning signs. On the day after the burial, Faith woke to find Betty and George sitting in her living room, uninvited. Betty's face was no longer wet with tears. It was hard, set like cement. She looks up from the sofa, her voice sharp. "We need to talk about the children." Faith blinks, still in her morning clothes from the day before. "What about them?" George leans forward, hands clasped. "They are too young to be raised by a woman alone. You have no family here in Lagos, no brothers to guide them." Faith feels her chest tighten. "I am their mother." Betty waves her hand dismissively. "A mother, yes, but what kind of future can you give them? Vincent is gone. His salary is gone. How will you pay school fees? How will you feed them properly?" She pauses, letting the words settle like poison. "Roselyn should come and stay with me in the village. Victoria can stay with George and his wife. They will have proper structure, proper upbringing." Faith's voice is barely a whisper. "You want to separate my children?" George nods, as if this is the most reasonable thing in the world. "It is for their own good." Faith's hands begin to shake. They just lost their father. Now you want them to lose their mother too? Betty stands, her voice rising. "Do not be selfish, Faith. This is not about you. This is about what Vincent would have wanted." And there it was, the first blow. Not with fists, but with the memory of the man she loved, twisted into a weapon against her. They did not come once, they came again and again. The following week, George arrived with papers. He sits at a small dining table, spreading documents across the wood. Vincent's car is registered in his name. The furniture here, most of it came from our family home. We will need to take inventory. Faith stands in the doorway, watching him catalogue her life. "The car was a gift to both of us. He told me that." George does not look up. "But your name is not on the documents, is it?" It was not. Vincent had always meant to add a name, but there had been time for that later. Except later never came. Betty returned the next day with 2 women from the family compound. Auntie's Faith had only met twice. They walked through the flat, touching things, whispering. One of them opens the bedroom wardrobe and begins pulling out Vincent's clothes. Faith steps forward, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" The older aunt, a heavy woman with a sharp tongue, looks at her with pity that feels like contempt. These are family property. They should be distributed among his brothers. Betty folds her arms. Unless you plan to wear them yourself. The women laugh. Not loudly, but enough. Enough to make Faith feel like a stranger in her own home. That night, Victoria asks her a question that breaks her in half. The little girl sits on the edge of the bed, her eyes too old for 8 years. Mommy, are we going away? Faith pulls her close. No, my love, we are not going anywhere. But she does not know if that is a promise she can keep. The third visit is when everything changes. It is a Sunday afternoon. Faith is helping Roselyn with her homework when she hears the knock. She opens the door to find Betty, George, and a man she does not recognize. A tall, stern-looking elder from their village. Someone whose presence is meant to carry weight. They do not ask permission. They walk inside. Betty gestures to the man. This is Elder Chief. He has come to witness our agreement. Faith's heart begins to pound. What agreement? George pulls out a handwritten document. We have decided. Roselyn will go to the village with Mama. Victoria will come to my house in Ikeja. You can visit them on holidays. Faith's voice is ice. There is no agreement. I have not agreed to anything. Betty's face hardens. You think you have a choice? You are a widow now, Faith. You have no husband, no protection. In our culture, children belong to their father's family. Vincent's blood runs in them, not yours alone. The elder nods slowly. It is tradition. The family has the right to ensure the children are properly raised. Faith looks at George, searching for a flicker of humanity. Your brother loved me. He would never want this. George's jaw tightens, but he does not waver. My brother is not here. We are. Victoria and Roselyn are in the bedroom, but Faith knows they can hear everything. She thinks of her daughters being split apart, of Roselyn crying herself to sleep in a village where she knows no one, of Victoria learning to call another woman mommy, because it is easier than fighting. And something inside her, the part that has been bending and bending under grief, finally locks into place. She straightens her spine. Her voice is calm, but it carries a new weight. You will not take my children. Betty laughs. And who will stop us? Faith meets her eyes. The law will. The room goes quiet. George leans back, amused. The law? You think a piece of paper will change tradition? Faith does not answer. She walks to the door and opens it. Get out of my house. The elder frowns. You are being disrespectful. Faith's voice does not shake. I said, get out. They leave, but Betty's final words linger in the air like smoke. You have made a mistake, Faith, a very big mistake. Faith does not sleep that night. She sits at the kitchen table with her phone and a notebook, her mind finally clear. Grief has been a fog, but rage is a spotlight. She begins to write down everything. Dates, conversations, witnesses, every item Betty and George have taken, every threat they have made. The next morning, she calls Martins. Martins is a lawyer, a friend of Vincent's from university, is someone who had come to the funeral and pressed his card into her hand. If you need anything, he had said, anything at all. She needs everything. They meet at his office in Yaba. Martins listens as she speaks, his face growing darker with every detail. When she finishes, he leans back in his chair and shakes his head. They cannot take your children, Faith. Not legally. You are the biological mother. You are not unfit. Unless there is evidence of abuse or neglect, which there is not, no court in Nigeria will remove your children from you. Faith feels something crack open in her chest. But they said, tradition. Martins holds up her hand. Tradition is not law. Yes, some communities have customs about children belonging to the father's family, but those customs do not override your legal rights as a mother. He pauses. What they are doing is intimidation, and it is working. Faith's voice is small. So what do I do? Martins pulls out a folder. We file for a restraining order. We document everything they have taken. If they show up again and try to remove the children, we involve the police. And we make it very clear, legally, that any attempt to take your daughters will be considered kidnapping. Faith exhales for what feels like the first time in weeks. Can we win? Martins looks at her with something like admiration. You already started winning the moment you said no. The restraining order is served 3 days later. George calls her, his voice tight with fury. You brought lawyers into a family matter? Faith's voice is steady. You brought elders and threats into my home. I brought the law. He hangs up. Betty does not call. Instead, it's as she shows up at Faith's shop, standing in front of the counter while customers watch. Her voice is loud, meant to be heard. You have turned your back on your husband's family. You have disrespected his memory. The village will hear about this. Faith does not flinch. She leans forward, her voice low but firm. The village can hear whatever it wants, but my daughters will hear their mother's voice every morning when they wake up, and every night when they sleep. That is what Vincent would have wanted. Betty's face twists, but she has no answer. She leaves. 2 weeks later, Faith receives a call from George's wife, a woman who has been silent through all of this. Her voice is quiet, almost apologetic. Faith, I just want you to know. I told George this was wrong. I told him from the beginning. She hesitates. He listens to his mother too much. I am sorry. Faith closes her eyes. Thank you. It is not much, but it is something. The final confrontation happens not in a courtroom, but in a church. A family friend, someone respected by both sides, calls for a meeting. A mediation, he calls it. Faith agrees, but only with Martins by her side. They gather in the pastor's office. Faith, Martins, Betty, George, and the pastor himself, a gray-haired man who has known Vincent since he was a boy. The pastor begins with a prayer, then looks at Betty and George. I have heard both sides, and I must say I am ashamed. Betty starts to speak, but the pastor raises his hand. Vincent was a good man, a loving father, and if he were here today, do you think he would want his children torn from their mother's arms? He looks at George. Your brother married Faith. He chose her. He built a life with her. And now that he is gone, you want to erase her? George shifts uncomfortably. We only wanted what was best. The pastor's voice is sharp. Best for whom? For the children or for your pride? Betty's face is stone, but her hands are trembling. Martin speaks next, his tone professional but cold. Mrs. Betty, Mr. George, let me be clear. If you attempt to contact Faith or her children again without her permission, you will face legal consequences. If you attempt to take anything else from our home, it will be treated as theft. If you continue to harass her, we will pursue a formal case. He pauses. This ends today. The room is silent. Finally, the pastor sighs. The elders used to say, a tree that does not bend with the wind will break. You have tried to break this woman, and instead she has stood firm. He looks at Faith. Go home, my daughter. Raise your children in peace. That is what Vincent would have wanted. Faith stands, and for the first time in weeks, her shoulders do not feel heavy. 6 months later, Faith's shop has grown. She has hired a young girl to help her, and the small provision store now stocks enough to pay school fees for both Victoria and Roselyn. The girls are thriving. Victoria has started drawing again, and Roselyn no longer wakes up crying in the night. Betty and George have not returned. Word around the family is that Betty fell ill and is now being cared for by distant relatives. George is too busy with his own struggles to manage it. The irony is not lost on Faith. The woman who wanted to take her grandchildren has no one to care for her in her old age. Faith does not celebrate this, but she does not mourn it either. One evening, as she tucks the girls into bed, Victoria asks her a question. "Mommy, were you scared?" Faith smooths her daughter's hair. "Yes, my love, I was very scared." Roselyn's small voice comes from the other bed. "But you did it anyway." Faith smiles. "I did it anyway." Because that is what mothers do. They do not wait for permission. They do not bow to tradition that seeks to harm. They do not let fear decide the future. They fight, quietly, strategically, fiercely, and they win. Here is the truth this story teaches us. Grief does not make you powerless. Widowhood does not erase your rights. And family, true family, does not use your pain as an opportunity to take what is yours. Faith fought back not with anger, but with clarity. Not with violence, but with the law. Not with loud words, but with unshakable resolve. And in the end, her children did not lose their father and their mother. They lost only their father, and that was loss enough. What lesson stood out to you in this story? Was Faith right to involve the law, or should she have tried to keep peace with the family? Tell us in the comments, and tell us where you are watching from. We love hearing from our family all over the world. If stories like this speak to you, stories where women discover the warrior inside them, where the underestimated rise, and where justice finds its voice, you are welcome here. Subscribe for more African stories where truth always wins, even when the battle is hard. Thank you for watching.